When I first started seeing infographics and heard people in the autism community and ADHD communities talking about rejection sensitive dysphoria, I was a little bit cautious. And I guess the reason that I felt cautious was the name, Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria. It threw me off. And when I read the descriptions of it, I still found myself being hesitant to wholeheartedly accept it. Before I get into what it is, and I feel like my initial hesitation was wrong, I feel like it ties in at the end to the possible causes for rejection sensitive dysphoria. And so that's why I'm going to explain my initial reaction to the name. When I first started hearing about rejection sensitive dysphoria, I kind of thought back to my own personal experiences growing up. And so I'm not going to lump all autistic people together in this. I'm one person, and I'm going to talk about my own personal experience. And my own personal experience is that growing up, I was just very naive. As a junior hire, I was just more naive than other junior hires, more like a younger kid, not intellectually, but emotionally, socially. And then as a high schooler, the same thing. And even as a college student, the same thing, which wasn't great because I was getting better and better at masking as I went along. I wasn't really very good at masking socially in junior high, but about midway through high school, I probably started to catch on a little bit. And by the time I got to college, say like my sophomore year, I was starting to really get the hang of the whole masking thing at a pretty steep psychological cost. But other people weren't catching on to how much I didn't get, how trusting I was. And intellectually, it was like I was a college student, but socially and emotionally, I was a lot younger. I masked. I could hide it. And looking back, especially like now as a mom, it's probably more and more upsetting the older I get, because the older I get, the more I realize just how much I didn't know. Because at the time, I just thought everybody thought the way that I did. I knew that I thought differently than everyone else at it, like in an intellectual way. I knew my mind was different that way, but I didn't realize how different my mind was socially and emotionally, if that makes sense. The point of all of that whole thing is that I feel like those of us who do fit into that kind of naive template, that's not the word I'm looking for, but we'll go with it, have a tendency to get hurt a lot by people that we think we should be able to trust. We trust people easily, and then just it doesn't work out because people take advantage of that sort of like complete trust. I don't know how widespread that is across the spectrum with different people, but I know that that is how my brain worked originally, because I wasn't really built to lie to people, at least for myself. I knew other people lied logically, but I don't know. I just sort of expected the same things from other people. I was naive. We'll just leave that there because this is already getting long. Anyways, when I started to learn about rejection sensitive dysphoria and I heard that floating around, my first thought was dysphoria? What? Because I was just skeptical that it was dysphoria. I thought, you know what? A lot of neurodiverse people tend to be naive. Not all of us, I'm sure, but a lot of us are, and we get taken advantage of. And is it really dysphoria if other people are just jerks? That was my first thought when I heard of it. But I wanted to learn more, and that is why I decided to make a video. So that I could learn more and you could learn more. There is, of course, more to it. There was going to be more to it, always, right? So let's get into this together, because that's what this video is about. That story took longer than it probably should have. Rejection sensitive dysphoria is an extreme emotional reaction and pain that occurs when that emotional reaction is triggered by a perceived rejection from someone close to the person that is having the reaction. It doesn't really necessarily mean that the person has been rejected by the person that they care about or hold in high regard. It just means that they think that they've been rejected or that they've been put down in some way, and they react in a really strong way. They either are really hurt or they explode emotionally. Here's the thing, and this is why we're talking about this. It's thought, according to Adhd, that 99% of people with ADHD experience rejection sensitive dysphoria. So that's why we're talking about this. No one likes to fail, but with rejection sensitive dysphoria, it's so much worse than just not liking to fail. It's like the entire world's ending because you think that you've failed. You've completely lost perspective on the impact of this supposed failure. Rejection sensitive dysphoria is a sudden change in mood. It's a major cycling mood disorder. And it's also a very common symptom of ADHD that's misdiagnosed or missed when ADHD is being diagnosed. It's sometimes missed and thought to be borderline personality disorder, or it's sometimes thought to be PTSD, or people are sometimes thought to be bipolar when they have this. It's sometimes thought to be OCD, and it's sometimes thought to be, I'm trying to think of what some of the other ones were, because there were more. Borderline personality, OCD, PTSD, and it's sometimes just thought to be depression. One of the worst things about this, well, okay, there's a lot of bad things about this. I'm not sure I can say this is the worst, but one of the bad things about this is that sometimes people start to anticipate rejection, which can completely ruin relationships, or at least make them a lot harder. When people start anticipating being rejected, they start to act differently, and that can sabotage relationships before they even get started. People with RSD sometimes become people pleasers, which is something that happens with ADHD anyways. Maybe because of RSD, they just try to make everyone happy all the time, which isn't really practical or possible because no one can make everyone happy all the time. The other side of that is that some people with RSD just stop trying. You can't attain that perfection of making everyone happy all the time, and so some people just give up. Then of course there's that other side of being a people pleaser where people become complete and total perfectionists. They're so afraid of that rejection and that explosion of emotion that they just try to be perfect all the time, which isn't realistic or possible. Now, since we're talking about this, I think it's absolutely important we talk about the signs of RSD. One of the big signs of RSD is being easily embarrassed. Another one is getting really angry and having huge emotional outbursts, especially really suddenly, like going from being perfectly happy to just exploding out of nowhere, or seemingly out of nowhere, not out of nowhere, but at a rejection or an imagined rejection or imagined slight, or an actual slight or rejection, just sort of losing it. People with RSD often have low self-esteem, and they also have a tendency to set impossibly high standards for themselves that there's just no way that they can achieve, which really doesn't help with the self-esteem or with really any of this. People with rejection sensitive dysphoria tend to have anxiety, and that anxiety tends to be much worse in social situations. And of course, because of all of this, people with the rejection sensitive dysphoria tend to have problems with relationships. When you have so much anxiety surrounding relationships, and when you're imagining perceived slights everywhere, that's not going to be easy on anyone. Oftentimes people who have this tend to start to avoid social situations and withdraw from the people who are in their lives. And they may start to feel like a failure because they believe that they haven't lived up to others' expectations or to those impossibly high expectations that they've set for themselves. And people with rejection sensitive dysphoria may think about hurting themselves. One of the things that I actually found most surprising about this was that in terms of treatment, therapy was not something that has been found effective with rejection sensitive dysphoria, which surprised me because it seems like usually the first line of almost everything is always therapy. So I thought this was really interesting. The things that predispose you to this, it said, tend to be genetic, ADHD, childhood experiences. One of the main things that a lot of the things I read mentioned was that children with ADHD, by the time they're 12 years old, will have had about 20,000 more negative experiences, like negative comments from adults than their peers. So they're just told, they're just put down a lot more than other kids. And that affects you. Well, not exactly what I was talking about earlier. I think it does kind of tie in a way. That the way that we're treated, I think it does tie in to what I was talking about earlier. Not exactly what I was talking about. I was talking about being naive and how that affects us, being more defensive in this way. It was being put down a lot and being told basically you're bad, or you know, you're doing things wrong so many times that it changes the entire way you look at yourself and the world around you and your interactions with every person, especially the people that are most important to you. So what actually helps? Well, what's been found to make the biggest difference with RSD is, I hope I'm saying this right, alpha agonists like clonidine and guanfacine. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Although a lot of doctors have had success treating them with MAOIs. MAOIs. Why is my mouth not working right now? I can say that. I said it like 100 times before this, and now my mouth is just like... And that 20,000 number makes me so sad. It's just, it's sad and discouraging, and just... So by the time I got to the end of reading about this, I was like, okay, I am no longer going to be like, oh, that's not. I'm no longer going to react the same way when I see those infographics anymore, because I can see it. Sorry, still so sad about that 20,000 number. I just can't even. I think it does all come down to the same thing. That dysphoria, that seeing rejection everywhere, comes from the fact that for people who aren't neurotypical, there's a lot of rejection. Being told you're wrong or being hurt by people, I can't help but think that that in turn does sort of create this sense of dysphoria, where something like RSD has a 99% chance of happening for people who have ADHD. I could probably just go on and on, but I'm not going to, because this is probably already way too long. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on RSD and your experiences. So that's it for today. If you like this video, I would love it if you give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in all things autism, I'd love it if you did subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.